When you first encounter a narcissistic woman, what you meet is rarely the truth of who she is. You meet a performance. Confidence appears effortless, charm feels magnetic, and attention is given in a way that makes you feel uniquely seen. This is not accidental. It is a carefully constructed psychological mask. The purpose of this mask is not connection, but access. Access to your emotions, your validation, your energy. The danger lies not in obvious cruelty, but in how convincing the illusion feels at the beginning. From a depth psychology perspective, this mask exists to protect a fragile inner structure. Beneath the surface confidence often lives a profound insecurity and an unintegrated sense of self. As Carl Jung observed, the persona is the social face we present to the world, while the shadow contains what we cannot accept about ourselves. In narcissistic dynamics, the persona becomes overdeveloped, while the shadow remains denied. The result is a personality that must control external reality to avoid confronting its internal emptiness. This is why early interactions feel intoxicating. You are not being loved, you are being mirrored. Your strengths, values, and emotional depth are reflected back to you in a way that creates instant bonding. But mirroring is not intimacy, it is a strategy. Once emotional dependence forms, the mask begins to slip. Subtle control replaces warmth. Admiration turns into expectation. You are no longer appreciated for who you are, but for how well you maintain her self-image. What makes this especially disorienting is that the transition is gradual. There is no clear moment where the charm disappears. Instead, confusion sets in. You begin to question yourself, to work harder, to restore the version of her you first met. This is how control is established, not through force, but through psychological investment. Understanding this mask is not about blame or hatred. It is about clarity. When you can see the difference between genuine connection and strategic charm, you regain your psychological footing. And once you can see the mask for what it is, it no longer has the power to define your reality. The moment you stop being hypnotized by appearances is the moment you begin to reclaim yourself. Once the mask is in place and emotional access is secured, the true engine of the narcissistic dynamic reveals itself. The need for supply. Attention, admiration, validation, emotional reactions, these are not preferences. They are necessities. For a narcissistic woman, attention functions the way oxygen does for the psyche. Without it, anxiety rises, emptiness surfaces, and the fragile self begins to fracture. What looks like confidence is often sustained by a constant external feed. From a psychological standpoint, this need is rooted in an unstable inner identity. There is no solid core that can self-regulate worth or meaning. Instead, value must be confirmed from the outside, again and again. This is why love in these dynamics is rarely mutual. It is directional. Energy flows toward her, not between two equal selves. When you give freely, you are rewarded with warmth. When you hesitate, you are punished with distance, criticism, or emotional withdrawal. This is not random behavior. It is a system of regulation. Praise calms her inattention. Control restores balance. Drama reactivates attention when admiration fades. Even conflict serves a purpose because anger is still attention. Indifference, however, is intolerable. To be ignored is to be psychologically unseen, and that threatens the very structure holding the personality together. As Carl Jung understood, what is not developed inwardly must be compensated for outwardly. When inner stability is absent, the outer world becomes a stage where worth is constantly negotiated. This is why narcissistic relationships feel exhausting. You are not participating in love. You are maintaining an emotional life support system. Over time, this dynamic trains you to perform. You learn what pleases her, what upsets her, and how to regulate her moods. Slowly, your attention shifts away from your own inner world. Your needs become secondary. Your silence becomes strategic. Your reactions become measured. This is how emotional extraction replaces intimacy. The turning point comes when you realize that no amount of giving will ever be enough, because the hunger you are feeding has no natural end. And when you finally understand that attention is not love, you gain the power to withdraw the one thing that was never meant to cost you yourself. As the demand for attention intensifies, another mechanism quietly takes hold, one that is far more damaging than overt control: the manipulation of reality itself. This is where gaslighting enters the dynamic. It rarely begins with obvious lies. Instead, it starts with subtle denials, small contradictions, casual statements like, "You're too sensitive," or "That's not what happened." Individually, these moments seem insignificant. Collectively, they reshape your relationship with truth. The psychological function of gaslighting is not merely deception, it is dominance. By destabilizing your perception, the narcissistic woman secures power without resistance. When you no longer trust your memory, your judgment, or your emotional responses, you begin to outsource authority over reality to her. This is not accidental. A person who doubts themselves is easier to guide, easier to control, and far less likely to leave. From a deeper perspective, gaslighting reflects a profound intolerance for accountability. To admit fault would require confronting inner flaws, and that confrontation is precisely what is avoided. So reality must bend instead. Events are rewritten, intentions are reframed. Your emotional reactions are pathologized, while her actions are justified. Over time, confusion replaces clarity, and clarity is the greatest threat to manipulation. As Carl Jung noted, when the ego cannot tolerate the truth of the shadow, it projects distortion outward. In narcissistic abuse, this distortion becomes relational. You are made to carry the confusion she cannot face within herself. The result is a slow erosion of your psychological autonomy. What makes gaslighting especially dangerous is that it often coexists with moments of apparent sincerity. Apologies appear without change. Insight is performed without integration. These moments keep hope alive, while the underlying pattern remains intact. You stay not because you are weak, but because your inner compass has been tampered with. Eventually, the most damaging question emerges: what is wrong with me? This question signals that the manipulation has reached its goal. The focus has shifted entirely inward, away from her behavior and toward your supposed defects. The moment you begin to trust your perception again is the moment the spell weakens. Reality, once reclaimed, becomes an anchor. And when you stand firmly in what you know to be true, no one can rewrite your mind without your consent. Once reality has been destabilized, another force binds you even tighter to the relationship. And this is where many intelligent, self-aware people become trapped. Trauma bonding is not weakness. It is a nervous system response to emotional unpredictability. When affection and cruelty alternate, the psyche does not relax. It hyperfocuses. Pain and hope become intertwined, and the bond deepens precisely because it hurts. At a psychological level, the mind begins to associate relief with the same person who causes distress. Moments of warmth feel amplified because they follow emotional withdrawal or criticism. Your system learns that endurance is rewarded, that patience brings closeness, that suffering is temporary if you just hold on a little longer. This is not love, it is conditioning. And it is powerful because it operates below conscious thought. The narcissistic woman may not consciously plan this cycle, but the pattern serves her need for control. Emotional volatility keeps you engaged. Stability would give you space to think, and thinking leads to autonomy. By keeping the emotional ground unstable, attachment intensifies. You are no longer relating to who she is in the present, but to who she might become again. From a depth psychology perspective, this bond often connects to unresolved material within you. As Carl Jung understood, the psyche seeks wholeness, sometimes by repeating what is familiar rather than what is healthy. If early emotional experiences involved inconsistency, abandonment, or conditional love, the trauma bond can feel strangely meaningful, even fated. The pain feels purposeful, as if enduring it will lead to transformation. This is why leaving feels impossible, even when the relationship is clearly destructive. Logic says go, but the body resists. The nervous system interprets separation as danger, not freedom. Anxiety spikes. Doubt floods in. You remember the good moments with clarity and minimize the harm. The bond tightens not because the relationship is good, but because it is unresolved. Breaking a trauma bond does not begin with anger. It begins with understanding. When you realize that intensity is not intimacy and suffering is not depth, the spell starts to loosen. Healing requires consistency, not chaos. Safety, not drama. And the moment you choose emotional stability over emotional intensity is the moment your psyche begins to return to itself. As the trauma bond weakens and emotional clarity begins to return, something subtle but decisive shifts in the dynamic. What emerges then is fear, not the kind expressed openly, but the kind that operates beneath behavior. A narcissistic woman is not most threatened by confrontation, anger, or even rejection. She is threatened by awareness, by the moment you stop reacting emotionally and begin observing calmly, because awareness exposes what control was hiding. At the core of narcissistic functioning is the avoidance of self-exposure. The inner world is carefully defended, not only from others, but from the self. To be seen clearly would mean confronting shame, emptiness, and unresolved shadow material. This is why emotionally grounded individuals are so destabilizing. When you no longer seek approval, no longer explain yourself excessively, no longer defend your reality, the usual tools stop working. Manipulation requires engagement. Drama requires reaction. Control requires access. From a psychological standpoint, this is where power truly shifts. As Carl Jung emphasized, what remains unconscious seeks expression through others. But when you refuse to carry projections, the system collapses inward. Her accusations lose momentum. Her provocations fall flat. Silence replaces confusion, and boundaries replace negotiation. This is not cruelty, it is self-respect. What often follows is escalation. Sudden affection, guilt-inducing vulnerability, or manufactured crises may appear. These are not signs of change, but attempts to restore emotional leverage. When those fail, anger or withdrawal may surface. Not because you did something wrong, but because the illusion of control is cracking. Your emotional independence reflects back something she cannot tolerate: irrelevance. It is important to understand this clearly. The goal is not to punish or dominate. The goal is disengagement from the psychological game altogether. When you stop supplying emotional energy, positive or negative, you remove yourself from the role assigned to you. And without a role to play against, the dynamic loses coherence. The most powerful boundary is not spoken, it is lived. Calm presence, consistent behavior, non-reactivity. These signal that you are no longer available for manipulation. And that is precisely what exposes the fragility beneath the facade. When you stop reacting, you stop reinforcing the illusion. And in that stillness, you reclaim the authority over your own inner world. When the struggle for control finally loosens its grip, what remains is not emptiness, but an opening. This is the moment many people misunderstand. They expect relief to arrive instantly, or strength to appear fully formed. Instead, what emerges first is silence, a quiet, internal space where reactions once lived. And it is within this space that real recovery begins, not by defeating another person, but by returning to yourself. The deepest damage in narcissistic abuse is not what was done to you, but what you were slowly pulled away from. Your instincts, your values, your sense of inner authority. Healing, therefore, is not about becoming harder or more guarded. It is about becoming more integrated. You begin to observe your emotions without being ruled by them. You stop chasing explanations and start honoring patterns. You no longer need the other person to admit the truth, because you are no longer disconnected from it. This process aligns closely with what Carl Jung described as individuation, the movement toward wholeness through conscious self-reflection. You reclaim the parts of yourself that were suppressed to maintain the relationship. Your anger, your clarity, your boundaries, your intuition. Nothing is rejected. Nothing is idealized. Everything is brought into awareness and integrated. As this happens, your identity stabilizes from the inside. You are no longer defined by reaction or resistance. You become grounded, not because life is suddenly easy, but because you are no longer fragmented. The need to prove, explain, or be understood fades. In its place grows something quieter and far more powerful: self-trust. This does not mean bitterness or emotional shutdown. True healing does not close the heart, it strengthens it. You become capable of connection without losing yourself, empathy without self-betrayal, and love without illusion. You begin to recognize that growth was never about enduring pain, but about learning to listen to yourself sooner. What once felt like loss reveals itself as initiation. You did not survive this to become smaller, colder, or resentful. You survived it to become conscious. And when you choose self-awareness over self-abandonment, you don't just leave the past behind. You step forward as someone no longer available for psychological captivity.